Let's move on to get a closer look at Studio. We will create a data model and graphic interface for a simple CUBA-based application for customers and orders management. In our data model, the order should have many-to-one relationship to the customer. The user interface of the application should include screens for browsing and editing customers and orders. In addition to that, the customer editor should display its list of orders. In this video, we will create the customer class and the screens for customer browsing and editing. Let's create the customer class. Switch to the Data Model section in the navigation panel and click New Entity. Enter the name of the entity class, Customer, in the Class Name field. The workspace will display the Entity Designer page. The entity name and the database table name will be automatically generated in the name and table fields. Next, let's create the entity attributes. Select the New button below the Attributes table. In the pop-up window, enter the name of the entity attribute in the Name field. Select the string type in the Type field and set the attribute length in the Length field to 100 characters. Check the mandatory checkbox to make this attribute required. The database column name will be automatically generated in the Column field. The email attribute is created in the same way. Once all the attributes are created, switch to the Instance Name tab of the Entity Designer. Here we will set the name pattern for the entity instances, or, in other words, the string representation of a record corresponding to an entity that will be displayed, for example, in a table cell or in a drop-down list. Select the name attribute in the Available Attributes list and pull it to a list on the right. The Source tab of the Entity Designer allows you to view the source code of the customer class. In fact, we could code it manually in an IDE, but Studio scaffolds it for us with the help of the Visual Entity Designer. The DDL tab, in turn, displays the script for creation of the Sales Customer Database table. At this point, we are done creating the customer entity. Click OK to save the changes and close the window. Click the Generate DB Scripts link to create the database table of the new entity. The Database Scripts Manager displays the generated scripts for a database update from its current state and the database initialization scripts. Click Save and Close to save the scripts. Select Run Update Database in the application menu to update the database. Now let's create the user interface for the application. In order to create the standard customer browser and editor, select the entity on the Data Model tab and click New Generic UI Screen. The Templates browser will be opened. CUBA Studio suggests several predefined screen templates: browser screen, editor screen, combined browser and editor, as well as the possibility to create both browser and editor at once. The browser screen is a screen for viewing all records from a database. It includes data filter and supports paging by default. The editor is a screen for viewing or editing an individual record. We will create two screens in one click. On the Generic UI Templates page, we see the name of the entity, Customer, and the entity view, Local. Views mechanism is a platform feature I'd like to mention separately. Most of the visual components in CUBA UI are data-aware, so you can specify a data source for those components, and this data source will be in charge of providing data to the component and committing new or modified data back to the database. So a view in CUBA terms explains to the data source what exactly should be extracted from the database to the UI. There are two predefined types of views. The first is the minimal view. It includes only the fields required to display the instance name of an entity. For the customer entity, it will just contain the name field, as only this field is used for its instance name. The local view includes all non-reference fields, so for the customer entity, it will contain both name and email fields. Click Create and close the Templates browser. Two new files, Customer Browse XML and Customer Edit XML, will appear in the Generic UI section of the navigation panel. You can modify any generated screen later in Studio and IDE. Let's see how the created screens look in the running application. Select Run Start Application Server in the menu. The customer browser was automatically added to the application menu. Click Create and add a new customer to be sure that the editor is functional. In the next video, we'll create the order entity, which is related to the customer, and the screens for it. To go further, we will make the customer editor display its list of orders.